Hey guys, this is Joe Romo with the Columbus Symphony Orchestra's Know the Score, hosted by conductor George Del Gobbo. This week's Know the Score will focus on our upcoming concert, featuring works by Tchaikovsky, Haydn, and Copland. Please enjoy this week's edition of Know the Score with George Del Gobbo.
Welcome to Know the Score for the last time this season. Our last concert this year is on May 22nd, which is a little bit later than normal for us, but in this very strange pandemic year, our season has been different in every regard. So playing this late, we hope is not a problem for you. We don't think it's a problem for us. Anyway, our last concert this season features a wonderful cellist whom we are very happy to have living amongst us in this community and teaching at Columbus State University, and that is Wendy Warner. Wendy first appeared with us more than, I would say, 25 years ago when she was a young person just starting out in her concert career, and she was then and is now a remarkable cellist and a mature artist. She has a technique and a way of playing the cello that is so natural that she makes it look easy. Even the hardest passages, the hardest things look easy, but don't be fooled. They are not, and her skill at playing the instrument and projecting her musical ideas is world class. It's really a pleasure and an honor for us to offer her as the soloist on this concert. She's going to be playing a piece by Tchaikovsky called Variations on a Rococo Theme. The Rococo is the period of music between the Baroque and the Classical period, that transitional period. Tchaikovsky was very fond of the music of Mozart and used it as an inspiration for a lot of what he wrote, and this was about the time of Mozart, maybe a little before. And this particular piece is not really a Rococo piece. The theme is not a Rococo theme in any way. It's a theme that Tchaikovsky wrote and felt that he was writing a Rococo theme and presenting it that way. It's a piece that he wrote in conjunction with a cellist at the time named Wilhelm Fitzenhagen. Fitzenhagen was a very domineering personality, and Tchaikovsky was the opposite. He was easily intimidated and was unsure about a lot of what he did as a composer, especially with relation to forms and the way he used form. And so he allowed himself to be pushed around, if you will, quite a bit by Fitzenhagen, to the point where there are two versions of this piece. The original version that Tchaikovsky wrote, and then the arrangement, if you will, or the version that Fitzenhagen played and premiered and toured with. That version, the Fitzenhagen version, is what's played by most cellists today, and it's quite different from the original. The movements are changed and moved, the order of movements are moved around. The cello part was probably a lot of it written by Fitzenhagen, and this caused Tchaikovsky a great deal of stress because he was not used to being treated this way. On the other hand, he did not have an aggressive enough personality to put an end to it, and so he ends up with a piece with his name on it, a lot of which was probably written and edited by Mr. Fitzenhagen. In any case, it's a wonderful piece for cello and orchestra. It's as close as Tchaikovsky ever got to writing a cello concerto. And it's a theme and variations, as it says, as the title indicates. And it's a remarkable piece that takes us through, I think it's 8 variations of various explorations of various characteristics of the theme, and provides an opportunity for the cellist to display not only technical accomplishment, but also their ability to express and to explore musical feelings. And Wendy does it really well, and I'm sure that you'll enjoy the piece. we're concluding the concert with a symphony by Haydn. Haydn, of course, one of the great composers of the classical period. He lived practically the entire classical period. To put him in historical context for Americans, he was born the same year as George Washington, 1732, and he lived until 1805. So he had a very long life, and he wrote an incredible amount of music. He was employed for most of his career by the Esterházy family and lived at their court in Hungary. And he was a composer who gave form to much of the music that was written in the classical period and later. And by that I mean when he wrote an amazing number of string quartets, and he kind of, through his work in that area, he evolved and developed what a string quartet was. He wrote over 100 symphonies, and from the very earliest ones to the very end, you can see the development of the symphonic form, how it went from 3 movements to 4 movements, how he started to get away from the minuet and go into sort of peasant dances and what would eventually become the scherzo. How the first movement is the most serious movement of most symphonies, the last movement is a little lighter, and the slow movement is the soul of most symphonies. And Haydn does all of this, and it developed all of these things, gave form to all of these things, and influenced every other composer who came along. They all built their reputations from Beethoven on, based on what Haydn had done in the finalizing of the form of the classical symphony. So this particular piece is called the London Symphony, and it starts with a slow introduction, which a number of his symphonies do, and a number of other later symphonies, and Mozart and all of them. I mean, everybody imitated. The slow introduction has very little to do with the piece itself, which goes on and then is in sonata form. And this is a form that allows a composer to present his material in a very logical way, and then to develop it, and then to show it again after it's been developed. So what you have in a sonata form movement is usually a principal theme that you hear right at the beginning, in this case after the slow introduction. Then there's a little transitional material, then there's a secondary theme. Sometimes after a little more transitional material there is a third theme, but not always. And then that whole business is called the exposition. The composer is telling you, this is what this piece is about, this movement of this piece is about, these themes, this is what we're working at, so remember them. And so that you can remember them, the exposition is usually repeated, so you get to hear them twice. That's followed by a development section, in which the composer works with various aspects of his themes to show what a great composer he is. And he might choose rhythmic aspects, melodic, harmonic, anything that the theme suggests to him can be used. And he can use counterpoint, he can write fugues, he can do just about anything. Sequences, you name it. Anything is fair game in the development section. And eventually he works back to a repetition of the exposition, which is called the recapitulation. And this again is a statement of the themes of the exposition. This time the harmonies are different and the second theme is in a different key, so it gives it a sense of finality, but it also reminds you kind of where you've been. And that whole journey from introduction of the themes to development of the themes to reminding you of the themes to let you see the themes in a whole new light perhaps after the development section. That's what sonata form is all about. And that form was the dominant form of music in the classical and romantic periods, especially in the first movement of things like string quartets, concertos, symphonies, and so on. The second movement is a typical Haydn second movement. It's very beautiful. It's kind of a storm and drum kind of movement. It changes from very beautiful to quite stormy music. The third movement is a kind of a little advanced minuet. We're on our way to a scherzo. And the last movement is a movement that's kind of sounds like it's based on a folk song. It has a low held long bass note over which we hear this kind of rollicking folk song, and it ends in a very joyful, happy way. A typical symphony and the culmination of Haydn's massive output of 104, maybe a few more symphonies. There are some that people aren't sure that whether he wrote them or not. And the concert will start with a piece, maybe the most famous piece, the most popular piece, by American composer Aaron Copland. Copland is a very unusual figure. He was perhaps the most prolific American composer of the 20th century, maybe the greatest American composer of the 20th century, depending on what criteria you apply. Certainly among the most listened to composers of the 20th century up until even today. The most famous piece he wrote is called Appalachian Spring, and that's probably his most performed piece, but he was famous for lots of other things. Ironically, he was born in Brooklyn, New York, and into a Jewish family, so he had that heritage, but he was very successful writing music about cowboys and about the American West. Pieces like Billy the Kid and Rodeo, pieces that represented the cowboy life, and which is very unusual for a person who probably had no idea even what a cowboy was. I mean, he did not have that experience at all, but coming from the big city as he did, but he was very successful at putting himself in the minds of those kinds of situations and presenting music that reflected at least a romanticized version of an outlaw or a cowboy or whatever. Appalachian Spring was a piece that was commissioned from him during the early 1940s. The Library of Congress, through Elizabeth Sprague Coolidge, who was one of their principal benefactors, and she was a woman who commissioned a lot of great music from living composers, and her catalog is quite amazing. But she, working with the Library of Congress, commissioned Martha Graham to do an American ballet, and Martha Graham approached Copland to write the music. And he didn't know what the subject was going to be right away, but eventually it became a ballet based on a poem that dealt with the pioneer lifestyle and how the pioneers lived and worked and had to work together in community in order to survive. And it became known, the title, Appalachian Spring. The poem refers to the spring as kind of a water source, but the ballet represents spring as kind of a season to which you strive to get to. And the ballet contains 4 characters. It's very simple, and Martha Graham danced the principal character herself. And Copland wrote the music. The original version was for a very small ensemble of 13 players. A very small contingent of strings, a piano, and a couple of woodwinds, and was extraordinarily successful. Copland's music captured the ethos of what Ms. Graham was trying to do, and the whole project, which culminated in like 1945, was very, very successful. Later on, Copland was asked to expand the piece into a larger piece that would employ a symphony orchestra, and he was happy to do that. And in the process, he cut about 10 minutes worth of music that he felt were mostly there for choreographic reasons, and he put together the suite from Appalachian Spring, and it's the piece we know and love today. It's especially popular because it contains his little theme and variations on the Quaker song, The Simple Gifts, which everybody knows, and when we get to it in the suite, you'll go, oh yeah, that. If you hadn't heard this piece before, you've certainly heard this hymn tune that was written in the middle of the 19th century. So all of that put together made for a representation of this kid from Brooklyn, of life of the early pioneers in the mountains of the Appalachian region of our country, of the building of a new farmhouse, of the marriage of a young couple, of their struggles and their joys in making a home for themselves and their family. So Copland, Tchaikovsky, and Haydn, it's a little bit of an odd combination, but I think each piece has something definite and wonderful to offer, and we hope that you will enjoy it. And whether you come in person or visit us digitally, we'd like to hear from you. Tell us what you think, and we'll see you next year. Thank you so much.
We hope you enjoy this week's edition of Know the Score with George Del Gobbo. If you are interested in supporting the CSO or purchasing tickets, please visit our website csoga.org and be sure to check out our new digital broadcast pass so you can enjoy the sounds of the CSO from the comfort of home.